She was just down in Florida on spring break, and she was looking at University of Florida, a gator.
Oh, no. Well, I have 7 o'clock. Bart, are you ready?
All right. All right, well, it's time, so we will call to order the Town of Farragut Visual Resources Review Board meeting for March 2022. So the first item on our agenda tonight is to approve the minutes for the February 2022 meeting. Is there any discussion from the board for the February meeting minutes? Okay. If no discussion, do we have a motion?
I'll move for approval.
A motion for approval by Alderman Pinchak. We have a second by Ms. Moore. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, so moving down to the ground-mounted sign applications. Top Golf primary ground-mounted sign at 11400 Outlet Drive is our item for tonight. So with that, I'll turn it over to staff.
Okay, this is a request for the primary ground sign at the entrance to the Top Golf that's being developed out on Outlet Drive. You all looked at this sign for input. I believe last meeting they had asked you to, or it might have been 2 meetings ago, they had asked for your input on the design of the sign and the look at the sign before they went ahead and updated all their plans. So they've since updated all the plans that go along with it. It's compliant with the town's regulations. It also fits in and is has been coordinated with the landscaping plan that was previously approved by the board probably almost a year ago. It's been a long time since you looked at the landscaping plan. So here's the design of the sign. It's a total of 31.5 square feet, and the area that we're measuring there is the darker black box that has the Top Golf and logo on it. The rest of it is considered part of the structure from an area standpoint. Sign's being set back about 28 feet, so that's fine in terms of the area for that number of feet of setback. So here's what it'll look like. That's just construction stuff. Here's the setback information. It's set back from everything, and they had made provisions for it on the original landscaping plan. Originally, they thought they were going to be able to have a larger sign, so they had left a bigger area, and they went ahead and put a note in there that that blank area would be filled in with the surrounding landscaping. So it is compliant. You've looked at it in the past. It meets all the town's code, and it's been well coordinated with the landscaping plan. So staff can recommend approval of it.
All right. It seems, from my memory, that it looks the same as what we've already provided input on. But with that, are there any questions or comments to staff from the board? Landscaping wise, what they have around there, I'm sure the rendering was a little bit different than what's actually going to be around it, but it's always hard to read some of these plans. But
it's a mixture of low shrubs and some ground cover and some flowering components. It well exceeds what's required, which is 50 square feet around the base and 6 shrubs. So,
and they are low-growing shrubs that should not come up.
In fact, a lot of them are actually somewhat either behind the sign or further up, above as you're coming in. So the sign is, the shrubs will be further up the driveway as you're coming in. So it should not block the visibility of the sign from somebody driving down Outlet or turning up into the development.
All right. Are there any other questions or comments? It seems like there are none. Do we have a motion?
I'll move for approval.
I'll second. have a motion by Alderman Pinchot for approval, and we have a second by Mr. Armstrong. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, one added item here. We have a sign from Great Clips that they would just like our input on. They were not able to get it on the agenda for this evening. And before we get into the litany of potential sign amendment, ordinance amendments, if we can take a quick look here at Great Clips and provide some input to them. And with that, I'll allow staff to give comments.
Sure. What happened here is they had originally made an application in late February, but our current online submittal system, it allows for people to stack multiple signs on one application, but we require an application per sign. And they were told that they were going to have to separate them, but they weren't, I guess, I'm completely cognizant of the deadline, so they missed the actual deadline to be on the agenda for action tonight. But, they spoke to the department, and, we thought we could at least get input, and, they could then move forward with fabricating the sign and all, if you're content with the way the way it looks. It's a permittable sign. It didn't get on the advertised agenda because there was a mix-up with the submission. There's actually two signs. I know you all are familiar with the Kroger Brooklawn development. There's one monument sign there off of Campbell Station Road at the entrance to Brooklawn, and then there's another one up there along Kingston Pike near the gas pumps. They'll be putting signs on both of those monuments, and here's what they propose. It's clearly, as visible, if not more visible, than the French Market sign. I think it's a permittable sign, something that's approvable. We just wanted to run it through the board, and if y'all are content with, with the sign, how it looks, we can, let them know that, and then we'll put it on the agenda for next month for actual approval. But this way, they won't have to wait a month to even find out if it's going to be approved or not.
Okay. So for tonight, we will not be voting, but if everyone could really just provide some input, and Bart will be able to pass that back to the applicant. My initial reaction is it looks very legible and fits in with what's already there. So, other thoughts on it?
I think it's great. No pun intended.
There you go.
That's actually something we're working right now to go back through some of our processes and see if we can, work with the MGO system and get some things resolved. And that's one of the things we want to get solved on signs, is to where, because it happens fairly often where someone that's not used to doing business with us will, be applying for a wall sign, a ground sign, a tenant panel sign. They'll stack them all up on one application. We have to return it and say, you're going to have to split these into 3 different permit applications. That's basically what happened here. And they just didn't get the split done and resubmitted by the deadline, even though they had originally turned it in prior to. So
I take it that's their logo. I mean, it's
Great
not going to
Clips.
change. We're not going to see something different.
Well, if the board's content with that design, I'll tell them, that's what they can do. If they change it, then, they'll have to come back. Well, they're going to have to come back regardless, but if
Right.
they were to fabricate something different, that, that'll be on them.
Okay. Just want to make sure that's clear.
Yeah.
I think it's fine.
Okay.
I think it's fine.
I agree. It's legible. It's
Good enough.
Okay.
What's going on with Petco on that sign?
It's just an arrow, just
It's
wait.
just an
Just
arrow.
put an arrow
That's what it
to
was.
show you which side they're talking about there. All right, so with that, we'll move on down to the other business, which is the continued review and recommendation of potential amendments to the sign ordinance. And everyone got those in their packet, and I think Bart did a good job of highlighting the potential changes that we would review, even though I think some of it was the same thing in different you know, within different zoning districts. But I think you've got it more concise here.
Yeah, that's one of the things that, you know, we knew some of what we wanted to change, but then we had to find every place in the ordinance that it would have to be changed to be consistent. So there were three really major amendments we made. You know, the first is to the peripheral accessory freestanding signs, which we discussed at a prior meeting, to allow people to have two at each driveway cut, and we put some additional setback provisions on them so they couldn't get too far away from the actual driveway. But it was to accommodate things like enter exit signs or little, identifier signs there at the entrance and exits to sites. And then at the last meeting, I noted that we were going to go back through the ordinance and look for other things that, we might want to change or consider changing, while we were at this. A couple things that have come up that in just dealing with the ordinance since it was, redone in 2020. Some of these things that, we did here are just purely to improve enforcement, make enforcement clearer. I work pretty closely with Holly on this, because she, does a lot of the enforcement activities, and, some things she thought were, would be clearer if we had to go to the, to city court, and the judge likes to see things very specific. Some other things are just items that have come up, that we just honestly didn't think about when we were doing it. And so one of those is to make provisions for general occupant signs. That used to be a sign that was permitted in the ordinance. It was to allow for people to have signage on their doors going into a business with hours and things like that. They were limited to 6 square feet in the old ordinance, and had to be within either on the door or within a set number of feet of it, and no higher than a certain height. So that got taken out because we rolled. At the time we were redoing the ordinance, we talked about it. We rolled it all into window signs because we used to only allow for temporary window signs. And we made window signage permanent and just said, okay, 25 square feet or I think 20 square feet or 25% of the windows, whichever is the lesser. But now we've run into some problems at times because not everyone has a glass door, and they still want to put something up on their door. Or people have wanted to put up, like a little identifier plaque next to their door. So we didn't really have any provisions for that anymore because we did away with general occupancy signs. So, we talked about that and thought, it's a minor incidental sign. We didn't even require a permit for them, and I still propose we don't. It's just, they can't be more than a certain number of square feet in total. They have to be located within a certain number of feet of the door, and they can't be more than 7 feet high. And, that lets people put things on their doors, hours of operation, anything like that. They can put a little placard next to their door if they want to have a little, like a doctor's office that might have 3 or 4 doctors listed on it, something like that. So we made provision for that, and again, it's very repetitive. It's in multiple places. And then the other thing, that I think is a pretty major change is to make some provisions for subdivisions, the pool houses and clubhouses, and community buildings in subdivisions. We really had no provision for that. They could have the same as a house in a subdivision, which is a 2 square foot placard on the wall. So, we have had some subdivisions call in and they've want to put up a sign of hours of operation or, private parking for that community at the pool house or something. If you drive around town, there's a bunch of them have them. People have just put them up. We thought that, it might be reasonable to at least talk about allowing that type of signage at people's, basically their community facilities within their subdivision. So what I did is I basically made provisions there for a general occupant sign on the building, and then also the peripheral accessory signs at the entrances to the facility within the subdivision. So those are the three large changes I made. And actually, if we go and look at the residential one, it's pretty much got everything in it. So it's got the basic language for general occupant signs. You see there, it's got to be on the door or the adjoining wall. It's got to be, within 5 feet of the principal building's primary entrance. Can't be more than a combined total of 6 square feet in area, and that's to allow for, somebody might have hours of operation, and then they may have something else on the door, so we can box each one the way we tend to box signs and do the area. And not more than 7 feet high, because that's about the height of a typical door jamb. So
That was one of my questions. So the top of the sign can't be any higher than 7 feet?
that's, yeah.
It's a little, not real clear when you read that.
Yeah, I can try to clarify that a bit, but, the
Not a big deal, but I
yeah,
had a little trouble.
It makes more sense if you go back and read the way we define and measure height in the ordinance, so.
Okay.
And then the peripheral accessory signs are there as well, which, it's basically the same language as the others. In some cases, I had to tweak it a little bit from one section to the next to make a little more sense. But again, that's to allow those signs, total of 2 square feet per sign, no more than 30 inches high, 15 feet back from the public road curb, 5 feet back from the entranceway curb, the driveway curb, or any parking lot curb, but no more than 10 feet from the driveway cut, so that people aren't just stringing them down the road. The same basic provisions. So those are some of the big changes. Of course, we had to, write a new definition for general occupancy sign. There used to be one in the ordinance. I basically used most of it. I took a little bit out because I put the standards in here instead of in the definition, because sometimes that creates confusion when a standard's written in the definition, people forget to go look at it. So I think it's better to have it in the actual regulations. Those things, again, had to be done in multiple places. So most of what's in here regarding those big things is very repetitive from one section to the next. Some of the other things we did in the ordinance, again, were to clarify items or to make things a little bit easier to enforce, we thought. So, I can run through this quick page by page if you want to, look at, what's highlighted in yellow quick. If you have any questions about, what I did and why, or if you've had a chance already to read through it, if there are any specific things you want to look at, that's fine too.
All right, could you go to the next page there? That's the rest of that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And that's basically the language that you looked at the last meeting and asked me to make a couple of clarifications and tweaks on, and so that's what I came up with.
And I guess the question, I remember us discussing this at the last, but that last highlighted sentence there talking about a dividing median and comparing that to what was at the top of that, just so we're completely clear on what we're saying here. And the example I think we
Tell you
used
what,
was,
I'll go to one that just has it.
the example we used was the bank that's over here at the Village Green Shopping Center, right, that has the dividing.
Yeah.
They would be allowed
Well, I don't have
one sign per coming in and one sign per coming out, or
Yep.
2 signs coming in and 2 signs coming out.
Just one.
That's what I wanted to clarify.
Yep. It would just be the one. It would be,
Because the intent being that one of those would be entrance and one of those would be,
Yep.
that's the intent, right?
But in the case of McDonald's, they have 2 entrances, so they could have,
well, this would be per driveway.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
It would be different because they have a front entrance and a back entrance
Right.
at McDonald's.
Yeah.
So they could have one on each side
Right.
of the entrance.
So they could
Right.
have two enter and two
But,
exit
you know,
because they're separated.
Right.
But
Got
for
it.
instance, if they, say McDonald's, ever said, you know what, our entranceway on the front there, it's just too wide and it's all over, and they wanted to come in and put like a landscape island in there to break it up, that would not give them 4 signs on the front. They would have one on the exterior and one, because obviously one way, one side would be in and one side would be out. So, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk through that, but I think you made that clear.
Yeah, yeah,
The way it's
and actually, we added in that on the outside edges to even make it clearer that, so if you're, got a driveway, you're pulling up to, you got a median in the middle of it, one sign's gonna be out here and one sign's gonna be out here. They're not gonna be in the median, essentially.
Okay.
Does everybody feel comfortable with no permits for the general occupancy signs? I had some questions. I don't want to
That,
get too strict, but I just want to make sure everybody feels comfortable with that.
that's actually the way it was in the old
Did we have any
ordinance.
problems in the past?
Not really, not really. I mean, it's just, we already permit so much, and then if somebody's coming in, and they're going in and they change their business hours, or they decide they need to post their business hours, and they want to put them up, with like a clear vinyl with, just the, business hours, and put it up on their door, do they need to be coming in and getting a permit for that?
Yeah.
Type of thing. To my knowledge, it was never a problem in the past. And plus, if somebody doesn't read the ordinance and puts up more than they'd be allowed, it's not such an investment that they can't, cut it down to size either. So, I mean, that would be our recommendation. There's a few different types of signs that we just don't require permits for because they're sort of negligible signs and that, we'd be doing permits constantly for them anytime someone changed something like that.
Looking further on that, how many of those signs would be allowed?
Well, typically what we do for a sign that's on a wall or on a window or something like that is we encompass everything in a single box. But on this type of sign, we do it a little a little differently. So if they had the name of the business up near the top of the door, and then their hours of operation down lower, we don't count all that. We would draw 2 boxes, one for the name of the business, then one for the hours of operation. And the cumulative total can't be more than 6 square feet, which
Is
is
that
still
clear?
pretty small.
Is that clear in here?
It's the same language as what we used to have, and it wasn't a problem in the past.
Okay.
I mean, and again, Mark uses language elsewhere in the ordinance where, to make that distinction, he says a cumulative total, because, we're allowing them to box things separately and then come up with a total, as opposed to just an absolute total of.
But
so
it
many
doesn't
square
say
feet.
cumulatively total in this. That's my concern. Doesn't,
I thought I did. If I didn't, that's an oversight on my part. Well, I say combined total. Combined total is 6 square feet. Do not exceed a combined total of 6 square feet in area. So again, somebody could have the name of the business and hours, and if it wasn't too much, they could still maybe have a little placard on the side as well. And we
Okay.
would treat each one of those separately for a combined total of 6 square feet, which is not very much really when, it's 2 by 3.
2 by 3.
Yeah.
Okay, so that would limit from having signs all the way up
Yeah.
and down a door.
Yeah,
You would only be so many that you could really
Yep.
You really do.
Under general occupant. Now, somebody could, if they did have a glass door, and they wanted to have more, they could count that as part of their window signs. I mean, this would be in addition to window signage. So they'd still be allowed the standard window signage that they're allowed. I didn't try to do an offset, because it just seemed like that would make it, be that much more complicated. So this way, if somebody wanted to, again, have the name of their business on their door, hours of operation, but then still have some window signage, they would still be able to.
Okay.
Or if they had a solid door and it wasn't a window, they could still get the same amount of signage on their door that they would as a window sign would provide for.
Okay. Generally, is everyone comfortable with general occupant signs and peripheral accessory freestanding signs up to this point?
I have one other,
I am.
Right.
Changes.
I have one other quick question.
Sure.
On page 10, 2E, electronic and digital changeable copies. Does that have to do with billboards
Well,
and others? Or it doesn't say billboards, but
Billboards are a different animal under state law. This would be for everything else. Both of the changes on here were items that came up from enforcement issues or things that have come up in the past. The town's never allowed for electronic or digital changeable copy signs. And we've always covered that under item D, which, flashing, chasing, twinkling signs. We've had some pushback occasionally from sign companies, arguing that, that didn't cover that. And, again, rather than potentially having to go to the town, city court on that, we thought we would just clarify it. And then at the same time, our enforcement people have had issues where, like, some businesses have, like, mounted or wanted to mount, a computer monitor and stream video in their window. Or also the color changing signs, some of the lighted open signs that you see, they can flip a switch and they start changing colors and migrating around. And again, just to be really specific, we wanted to put that language in because that's something that, has never really been permitted. So those changes are just to clarify or make enforcement easier.
okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. That's all I've got.
And if you want, I can run through some of these real quick if you want.
I just have a clarifying question on that one. I think I know how I would read it and probably how all of us would, but the open and close signs, is blinking the same as flashing?
Yeah, they're not supposed to, and sometimes I wish we just didn't allow them because, it is a constant enforcement issue. I mean, I could put the word blinking in there. I mean, but because they put them up and it's just a neon sign or an LED sign that says open, and 2 weeks later they're flashing or they're doing something else, and then you go out and you ask them, stop, please. And, it stops. And 3 weeks later, it's flashing again.
During the day, like, you don't really notice it because it's bright outside and you just see open. But at night, when it's dark and they've left the open sign on and the business isn't open because it's dark, and it's very apparent that it's blinking, flashing, whatever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just making sure that that's, okay.
But the color changing is a different thing because it doesn't necessarily flash. It's more, it like morphs,
Yeah.
So, that's a change that the enforcement folks wanted. Just if they do have to go to court over it, they can point really specifically to the city judge and say this sign is a violation. They can take a picture of it or take a video of it and show it changing and be like, this is not a permitted thing for a sign to do.
All right, what other areas, or topics other than what we've already discussed, should we cover next?
Well, okay, like, I said that I had to create a definition for general occupant sign. It's slimmed down a little bit from the preceding one. Sign enforcement, you wouldn't think that was a big deal, but again, the enforcement people just wanted to make sure that, there wasn't an argument about, well, I got a permit, but I didn't put the sign up I had a permit for. You would think that that would be a no-brainer, but, there's color changing stuff. It's just some clarification in language there on when people are installing signs that they have to, we don't inspect that, but to put them on notice that it's their obligation to make sure that if they're hanging a sign on a wall, that's being done to code. That if they're putting footers in the ground, that's being done to code. Our codes people don't go out and inspect all that, but, this is something I think we talked briefly about. But, we've had a couple of subdivision entrance signs come in to where people have wanted to get the signs approved and permitted long before they ever build the road into the development. And, if it was a single entrance development, it probably wouldn't be that big of a deal, but we have some subdivisions that are done in phases over years. And, we don't really want to be in a situation of either having signs go up where there's really no entrance yet, a subdivision entrance sign when there's no entrance to a subdivision there yet, or to where we have run a sign through the VRB, it's been approved, and we have to track it for 5 or 6 years until that entrance actually gets put in. Because, A, it's a tracking problem, and B, the regulations may change, and you may change what you, as a community want to allow in the future. So, I wanted to clarify that, they have to at least have the road into the development rough graded or final graded and starting to put stone down on it. And that way there's still a ways out from being done, but, if they want to get started with their sign and start speccing it and doing all that kind of stuff and getting materials and pricing it and everything. It was just a clarification I thought, would be good, like Bridgemore, would be a good example of this. Eventually, Bridgemore is supposed to have an entrance on, I'm drawing a blank on the road there, but. Yeah, Allen Kirby Road. And it's been 18 years, so did we really want to have to, have a sign approved for that and track it for years and years and years until that entrance actually gets put on there? So, it's just this is a minor clarification. We allow subdivision exit signs. Some subdivisions have like informational boards that people can see on their way out of the development, and I just clarified a little language there for, sometimes they put them, behind the, the main entrance sign to the subdivision, but not every subdivision has that. Sometimes they put them in a median island, and this is just to make sure that they're kind of rear facing and aren't being seen from the, from the main street that's leading into the subdivision. So it's within. The next section there is just on the, the HOA controlled properties. This is just a minor clarification here that somebody having to put a base under a sign, it's for a newly constructed or reconstructed sign. If somebody is just is just refacing an existing monument sign, we're not necessarily going to make them rip it up and put a 2-foot base under it if it, if it can't be done easily. This is just more peripheral, accessory, freestanding, some more color changing.
Well, I saw blinking in that one. If you go
Yeah,
back to that
yeah.
one, see blinking
Yeah,
is
there's
there.
blinking
so.
in there on Windows. I think flashing beats it, but if you want, I can drop blinking in the other one too.
It's okay. It's in there, so.
General occupant again, that same newly constructed, because, the language is very repetitive from one section
Right.
to another. I think that's the bulk of it. One thing that came up today because of the Great Clips sign that Mark wanted me to bring up and ask you all about is, are tenant panels something that, y'all think should, keep coming to the VRB for approvals? Or is that something that, that the town might want to consider letting staff handle internally like we do wall signs? Y'all rarely see wall signs. The only time we bring a wall sign to the VRB is if staff's unclear about something, or if there's, if the applicant is just adamant about having something and the staff is saying, no, that's not something we can permit on our own, we'll send it to the VRB and get their input on it. We could do something like that with tenant panels. Most of the time, they're pretty simple signs, but not always. People a lot of times have to wait, oftentimes 30 days, to get a tenant panel approved and put up. Because, for instance, if somebody turned in a tenant panel application, say this past Thursday or Friday, they missed it. Well, even before that, I mean, if they submitted it really at any time last week, they missed the deadline for this meeting. And it's going to be another month until there's another meeting. So,
Are you saying that if it didn't have to come before this board, that it could have been approved sooner
yeah,
by the staff?
Typically the way we deal with, wall signs is, staff tries to get them comments back within 15 days. And typically we get them back within the week. And if everything's okay with it, they can have their permit and be fabricating the sign, within a week of turning in their application and have it hung on the wall, as soon as it's done. Oftentimes, before, really within the span of a month or, shortly thereafter, whereas on like ground signs and things like that, they have to wait to come here, have them reviewed, get input on them, then they get their permit, then they start fabricating. So there's a delay in there. And it, it makes more sense for ground signs because there's structures, they have, there's more coordination with the building and the landscaping and everything else that goes along. Really, some of the wall signs that get approved are pretty big and elaborate. Most of these tenant panel signs are pretty small things. I mean, almost all of them get approved. Sometimes there's input on them. So, Mark wanted me to run that by and see whether or not that's something that, that y'all wanted to think about, potentially making a recommendation on to the town to simplify that and potentially speed that process up. I mean, I think what our suggestion would be is, we would treat them very similar to wall signs, use a lot of the same language as wall signs, and make it to where, if it comes in, it's clearly permittable, staff can handle it, and if it's something staff wanted to, it would be staff's discretion to send it on to the VRRB if we weren't comfortable with it.
My initial reaction is I'm not exactly sure how I feel about it, because on the one hand, I think there could be some confusion when ground-mounted signs must come before this board, and that's a ground-mounted sign. I understand it's a tenant panel, but it's still on a ground-mounted sign, and now that doesn't need to come before the board, and I think that can create a bit of confusion.
Yeah.
And I do know that in the past, we've had a number of situations where the compatibility of signs upon those multi-tenant ground-mounted signs has come into question. And so having it come before the board resolves that or provides input on that. So
And-
that's some initial thoughts off the top of my head.
And that's an angle I didn't think about, and again, this, because this, the Great Clips thing came in, really, it came in and then, they talked to the department and we thought we would at least get input from you tonight. I mean, since we were talking about whether or not we would try to get input from y'all tonight on the Great Clips sign, the discussion happened up in the office is this something we want to, at least think about in terms of the board and ultimately a recommendation onto the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. Do we want to keep the way we do tenant panels the same, as we have been? Now, that is a good point because a lot of sign companies consider just any reface of a ground sign a really simple matter. They're like, the structure's there, we're just slapping a new face on it, And here we do tend to look a lot at compatibility of the signs and, legibility and how it's going to look with all the others on the structure. So, that could create some confusion as to, why do we have to take or why can we do a tenant panel that's this big by this big, but why can't we do, a reface that's this big by this big? So, yeah, that's a good point.
It seems like, too, and this is just my thought is that it's a good backup support for the decision that you as staff make, as
is.
opposed to them saying, well, you favored this one over me because my sign had to go to the visual review board, that one didn't. So it seems like it's some protection for you because, we're just citizens of Farragut. We have no authority. So that seems like that's more of a neutral kind of input as opposed to staff input. So it seems to me like it's a good protective backup plan for y'all too.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's nice to have a group of citizens looking at stuff and not just staff's opinion of things. But, it's something that we just wanted to throw out there since we're working on the ordinance anyway. And if it's a change that, we wanted to consider, running up the flagpole. And again, the way this process will work is, y'all are going to weigh in on proposed amendments, sort of recommend them on the, all of this is going to have to go to the Planning Commission. They're going to look at it all. And ultimately, it'll have to go to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen for the ordinance change. And honestly, with so many changes, we may just, may just readopt the ordinance in its entirety instead of trying to, sentence number, third sentence in the fourth paragraph to read as such. So
I'm going to give you just another take for discussion purposes, and that is that the decisions that we make on tenant panel, and I'm talking about individual panel, are really, there's not that much meat on the bone, okay? 90% of what we do are logos that we have no control over. There is a size limit on the size of those logos, and that's really it. They go as big as they can. The only thing I really think that we should have input on is when they don't bring a logo to us and they bring a font, when they're just typing things out because the logo's not conducive to that horizontal panel. But as far as I'm concerned, I would much rather vote on a wall sign than a tenant panel. Now, if we're creating a new tenant panel, of course, I think we ought to see that, but there's just not a lot of parameters there, in my opinion, anymore.
Yeah.
In a tenant panel. So, anyway.
I guess going back to Bart's comment, how do you see that, the tenant panel versus an entire panel? How do you view that? Because in that case, you would be looking at a lot more on an entire panel on a ground mounted sign. And I could see how that could be confusing to an applicant.
You mean a tenant panel that's already completed?
Like a multi-tenant panel is what we're talking about
Yeah.
versus a single panel.
Yeah.
For a single business. Because I could see them saying, well, if the multi-tenant panel doesn't have to come for a sign reface, why should my single panel tenant?
I'm only saying that I think that we should only be looking at brand-new construction on tenant panels. That's what I'm thinking, not individuals
Or refacing.
or refacing. Like an individual tenant panel, you've got a logo, great clips. What do we really have to look at right there today, right? Pretty quick decision. The logo's there. It can only be so big in order to get it. And if it doesn't read, well, that's on the company that designed it. We can't make the type on the bottom of that logo any bigger. It kind of is what it is. You're saying overall, look at the whole 10 tenant panels and make a decision based on how that tenant individual looks compared, like if it's multicolored compared to 10 tenant panels that may have black and white type or black and white logos?
Yeah, I think the compatibility of that with the rest of the panels plus the sign itself does play into our decision making, but I guess I'm still comparing that to a single business with a single panel on it.
Mm-hmm.
And what would they say if they had to come and get a permit for that change? Where over here on a multi-tenant panel for one of those and they didn't have to. I think that could create confusion.
I'm only referring to individual tenant panels on multi,
Right.
right? Because I just don't feel like, I mean, I have, not that anybody doesn't, I'm just saying that Bart and Mark have seen so many of these things that it's, you know, I mean, I've got a bigger issue with wall signage, honestly, and the size of those signs.
Okay.
Which we do not.
We don't see those.
We don't see those.
We haven't ever.
Right.
Right. That I'm aware of.
Yeah, and I'm just giving you another perspective, because I think some nights we come in here and we may have 5 of those tenant panels. And, you know.
Are you saying we should bring the large wall signs before this board? I mean, is that something you want to
I'm saying
vote?
that there is a dentist office across from Ingalls that has a gigantic sign. Gigantic sign. And so, I mean, I'm just saying.
Yeah, you raise a good point.
I mean, it's more important. See, to a business, I think for us, I just feel like it's more important to see the wall signage. I think that's a more important sign, the most important sign for them and for the town of Farragut, honestly, than a small tenant sign. So, and that precedes me on this board as far as when we have not ruled on any of those since
I think
I've been
that
on.
precedes all of us. I've never had
I've seen
those.
very few. I know, like, International Flair, for instance, they wanted a very specific sign. I think it was brought before us just
Right.
because of the weird wall spacing that they had and the size that they were allowed. The question was, how can we do that? And I think it was brought before us. So I think very few, like Bart was saying, have been brought here when input was needed. But, I mean, I remember that one because it was a very fancy sign that they had used somewhere else, and it wasn't compatible with what we would allow here in the town. But I have to agree, most of them that we approve are, I mean, we can't look at content of the sign anyway, so we can't look at what it says. All we can look at is the compatibility of what else is on there. Is the background color the same, you know, and is it as large as it will go? I mean, I think they look at enough signs in my book that they could do that quickly, and it would be a better experience for the business owner. I agree with the wall signs. I think there's a much bigger compatibility issue right now in a bunch of centers with even what's on the ground-mounted sign for a business and then what they have on the wall. So, you know, it's almost like, are we seeing a full picture at once of compatibility? Because, I mean, I've even driven up to a business and like, is that the same? Like, am I going to the same place? So, I mean, I think there's a need for a full view of what they look like. Like, I saw a wall sign that was put up the other day, a new one, thinking, where is that going to go on a ground-mounted sign? I don't know, but the wall-mounted sign was more important. So it doesn't really matter now if it goes on a ground-mounted sign, because really their wall-mounted sign is much more visible. I do think their wall-mounted sign sometimes would be nice to view and have input on. I think there's positives of both sides. I think it's a business experience for the town to be able to go quicker. I wish there was a way for us to just see some of those quick ones and go, yeah, go ahead, without having to come before the board. But there are some that we go, could we, that we have had input on.
And for the record, I'm not talking about like Top Gun, right? You know, I'm only talking about those small.
Yeah, we got it.
Marty,
Yeah, we
you've
got
been
it.
on the board probably the longest. Do you ever remember voting on wall signs?
No, what I was about to say is there was a time when on our agenda at the very top, underneath the minute approval, was a listing of all the wall-mounted signs that had been approved between the last meeting and the current meeting. And there was an ability of ours to at least discuss those or ask questions of staff. And I don't remember exactly when that stopped or why that stopped, but it did.
We could go back to that. I mean.
I think we all agree that's
I guess I've been
important.
working for the town for a little shy of 5 years now, and I don't recall that, but.
I think that's a good idea.
I'd like to ask then, where do those, so I guess I thought those were somewhere else on a different board. So who is it, just staff that reviews those?
It's just staff unless,
Okay.
either the staff or the applicant can ask it to be referred to the VRB, so if there's something that we're just really, uncomfortable with and we want input as a staff, to get input from the board where it, we look at it and we're like, well, on the one hand, it's right, it meets a lot of the parameters, but, we're just not sure about that one to get your input on it. And, the applicant can do the same, like if staff's just saying, no, we're not permitting that, and they just want to get some recourse from our opinion on it.
I'll just add in that, and I won't get into my experience, but as a business owner here in Farragut, I went through a sign process, and Bart and I talked a few times, and I'll just say that I guess I didn't realize that it didn't come. I think sometimes those may get some inconsistency or lost in the shuffle. If it came on an agenda, then I think like we said, I think there's maybe some more importance. I hate to use the word importance, but some more critical nature of those types of signs than these panels that we're spending a lot of time on. I think we should spend more time on those larger signs that are more visible, and that I can speak from personal experience, have a lot more intricacies about them that I think are worthy discussions versus what we spend time on.
And often when there's a wall-mounted sign, there is a corresponding multi-tenant panel sign or ground-mounted sign, right?
Yes.
And there's a bit of
Yeah.
compatibility
Right.
in the ordinance between those.
Right.
So it's kind of hard for me not seeing the wall-mounted sign sometimes when the ground-mounted sign comes in, because
That's right.
you're like, well, does the wall-mounted sign look like this?
That's right.
We've asked that question.
That's right. And matter of fact, there's a conflict right now going on in my office park between some signs. We're okay. We're in compliance, but
Yeah.
there's another issue over there. You may know what I'm talking about. That's a problem that they're working through, and I'm aware of it. But that could have been resolved, I think, in this type of discussion. I think, and maybe not, if we can unpack that at some point. But I think that could be what you were just talking about. But I assumed that those were already going to another board, and but if they're not, then I know that's probably not on the agenda. But that is something probably we should consider. Spending
I
more
was
time
not
on.
aware that this board was not involved in that decision-making, so
Or is
I think
it
it's something we should.
I'm sorry.
I think it's something we should possibly make a motion on and vote on.
I would too.
Yeah, I would only ask you, is it a expediency situation where folks are flying in here and they really need to get their sign created or designed
I mean,
quickly?
I'd have to ask Mark, what the basis of, the separation between wall signs and ground signs. I think, my gut from what I see is that, there's a lot more wall signs go up than ground signs. There's a lot of business churn or people coming in and, they're trying to get open. They've been working with codes to do a remodel. And then they get to their sign and they, want to get their sign hung up because they're, they, want to open in 2 weeks. And, so I think that's part of it is that there's a lot more wall sign activity than there is ground sign activity.
But I
And
think-
therefore a lot more visibility, and so a lot more critical
Yeah.
eyes, critical nature to it. And I can say this, there was an expectation when we went through this process that it's going to take a period of time, maybe not as long as it did, but I think there's an understanding that if you've got that type of sign, it may take, and you alluded to it, 5 weeks, depending on when they get it in here for it to go before the board, but.
Yeah, and that's the start. I mean, we would probably. I mean, if you wanted to make that recommendation ultimately onto the Board of Mayor and Aldermen to consider that process, we'd have to think about it a little bit. We may have to start requiring the sign applications to come in earlier. Like right now, it's 2 weeks prior, and sometimes that's tight on a ground sign. And to be honest with you, now with the architectural design standards and some of the things going on with buildings and the compatibility issues on those and on multi-tenant buildings, the signs have to be compatible, amongst themselves as well. And, not just with the building, but, if a shop, if everything is all, white backlit lettering, that sets the tone for the whole development, and that has to be followed. And so, we deal with a lot of that stuff as staff, just, internally going back and forth with the sign company and the owner, and sometimes it evolves, so we'd have to think about getting that in early enough that we could get some of the big bugs out prior to bringing it all to you. At the same time, either that or, I'm not sure, on.
On occasion, we have voted. Things have been brought to the board before.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wall signs. Yeah, and I don't want to single out the dentist. I feel like you guys 99% of the time are right on. But if you're asking for importance of one or the other, yeah, I think the wall signs are.
Thing I think we should consider here too is the amount of available land in the town is diminished. There's not that much left. At some point, true ground-mounted sign applications, and I don't know when this will be, what year, but there just won't be that many. There will be more multi-tenant panels. There will be more wall signs. It might not be a bad idea to consider should wall signs be back in front of the board. That makes sense to me. So,
Could you get some input from the other staff and put it on the agenda for next meeting so we can?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
You okay with that?
I think it's worth our exploring.
Okay.
Can we talk about
We can talk about anything.
That one just blows my mind, the landscaping does. That's time that's intensive, time intensive.
Yeah.
Well, that's probably a little more difficult, but again, I feel like with the amount of land that's available, that will diminish somewhat too. Because we don't have one of those every month.
No.
We have a sign every month. I don't want to forget, however, the amendments. Are you at a point where this board needs to vote, or are you still at a point where you're working on the language?
I mean, if you had just been content with everything from tonight, we probably would have been working on getting it scheduled on a planning commission agenda and putting the language in and basically doing the same thing we did tonight, which is go through and explain all the changes we're proposing. But at the same time, I think Mark feels like, if we're going to make changes and there's another, good sized one or two that y'all want to make, or at least propose, we might as well do it all at once.
Right.
So, the only thing that's really been hanging out there are those, the enter exit, the peripheral accessory signs, and that's really just been an enforcement issue. And so, if it waits another month, it's not going to be the end of the world.
Okay. So at this point, we've provided comments on the amendments, and that's where we are for tonight. Because I know this has
Yeah.
been something we've commented on 2 or 3
Yeah.
months in a row, and we're still at that process.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to, recommend everything that we already have, that's fine. But, but if we're going to come back next month and discuss, wall signs, we probably won't advance to the planning commission yet, because that'll be we'll have to put that in and, change the whole application process potentially. And, and the language that says that, they have to come here as opposed to just being done by staff, so that'll be another section of the ordinance, that'll have to be changed,
Okay.
so.
I'm comfortable waiting on a formal vote if everyone on the board is.
I agree.
Last item on the actual agenda, is there anything else that we need to cover tonight?
No, that's it.
Okay. With that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much. We'll see you next time. Are we clear now, Bart? Are we off the?
Oh, no, we'll have to ask Pam that.